Hi, this time we are going to study the control of human motion by sensory feedback control. So for the first two chapters, we learn how the dynamics principle could be used to understand the human motion and especially the human locomotion like a walking and running. And we know that those passive dynamics are not really actually the human body movements involved very complicated control. So as a simple control mechanism we'd like to implement in the first place is to model the muscle. We model the muscle contraction mechanism and implemented that to the previous dynamics model and examined how the jumping and throwing mechanics could be explained by that. How to control those muscles? There are many complicated sensory feedbacks are involved, such as the sensory inputs. Motion sensors are measuring the motions, and then those are sent to the brain part, like a cerebellum or the cerebral cortex, and then they generate the muscle activation control plan, the motor control plan. Therefore, about this huge sensory feedback loop, we are going to study how we can use those sensory feedback or feedback control knowledge into understanding human motion. So first, I'm going to briefly go over the control basics review and how sensory feedback of human motion in general, and going to talk about several examples about how we can implement those control knowledge to explain posture control, the upright balance control, and walking control. Okay, for review, do you remember the feedback control you might have learned in maybe undergrad system modeling or automatic control classes? So feedback control, feedback. So you actually send the signal back into the beginning place. Has a characteristics like you have a plan to control the target system that you want to handle. Do you want to apply the control input? You have to measure those output of this plan using the sensors, and those sensed measurement should be fed into the controller back, okay? So that the controller could generate the control input to make the system behave as you desire. To do so, your controller use the errors, okay, between the measured output versus your desired value. That's what we call the feedback. Okay, so your censored information's feedback send back to the controller input to calculate the errors. So usually those desired tasks could be the path planning. You have such a desired path to follow, and then you want to do the control for your system to follow the path, or you want to stabilize the system. So maybe stabilization is another path planning following the equilibrium per se. So typical engineering example for implementing feedback control is inverted pendulum. You might have learned in your automatic control class. So I want to maintain the upright posture. Definitely there is an equilibrium on the top, but that's not stable point. So whenever there's a little bit of disturbance applied, then it'll fall. So you have to apply the torque at the pivot point, and then how large is the magnitude should be about the T's that you are supposed to design as a control designer, control engineer. So the very beginning step is we have to obtain the equations of motion, and definitely here minus sign means it's unstable. And versus feed forward versus a feedback is feedback you actually measure your output and send back to calculate the error. Okay, so your control input is a function of the error, measured output, feedback information. However, the feed forward information here doesn't use those error value, your measured output value. So feed forward is just in one directional. The feedback is actually get the signals coming back. That's the difference. Okay, do you remember what was the transfer function is? Yes, a transfer function is the ratio of the Laplace transform of the output to that of input. Okay, so for equations of motion, if you take the Laplace transform of both sides, what you have is theta of s and t of s, and the double dot is the s square in the Laplace transform, and assuming that there's zero initial conditions. So if you divide by input versus the output, output versus the input, what you have is a transfer function which is 1 over s square minus sigma square. And also, if you apply the PD control, like a proportional to the error, proportional to the error rate change, is going to be this. So this is the closed loop transfer function. Okay. So those denominator term here actually determines how the system behave, how fast will the system will converge or diverge, and what's going to be the magnitude for the overshoot, etc. So the roots of the denominator of transfer function give us the informations about the system characteristics. That's what we call the poles. Okay, so open loop poles and closed loop poles means the denominator of the transfer function. Okay, so with that, we learned how to draw the block diagram, like a visual, the schematics about the whole structures of the control system. So you have a plant, you have to measure those output here, the x of s or theta of s, and those are sent back, feed back to the initial starting point, so that your desired value, reference value should be compared with your measured value, so that you can calculate the error. And those error values are sending to the controllers, and then controller will generate the control input to the plant as a form of proportional or proportional to the rate, etc. And also there could be some disturbances exist, and sensor noise could exist. Okay, so one controller what we have learned for undergrad automatic control class is a PID control. Do you remember what was that? Yes, the P control is set the control input to the system proportional to the error. Okay, so P stands for the proportional to the error. Okay, and the D is proportional to the derivative of the error, the rate of the error. Okay, that's the D control. And integral of the error, the cumulative error proportional amount of control is the I controller. So the PID controller is a typical feedback control example, and each controller has its pros and cons. So P control, if you increase the P gain, the system gets faster and system could reduce the error overall. And D, if you increase the D controller gain, it'll reduce the overshoot. So for the simple like inverted pendulum system, your P gain like could be analogous to the role for the increased stiffness. Okay, proportional to the error, proportional to the theta, proportional to negatively proportional to the theta, which is the spring, and for the D gain is negatively proportional to the theta dot, which is the kind of damper. So you can think about, yes, that if you increase the damper, system will be less oscillatory and reduce the overshoot. Okay, so for inverted pendulum, open loop response definitely diverge, and if you apply some PD controller, it will actually converge to the certain value for the step input. And if you want to reduce those overshoot, you can actually increase the D gains, etc. Okay, so basically you have to choose, you have to design the values of the P gain and the D gain, and sometimes even I gain. Okay, that's the control engineer should do. You should pick the values, appropriate values. How you can pick those appropriate values? Depending on the desired closed loop behavior. So figure that out. How are the trajectories? How are the possible behavior for the controlled system is depicted? How will be the closed loop systems of behavior will look like is shown in the S domain is a root locus. So for it's a Laplace transform, so the pole is going to be a function of S. So the x-axis is the real part of the S, and y-axis is the imaginary part of the S. And definitely positive S means it's unstable. So we want to put all the closed loop pole in this left half plane. Okay. So from k equals to 0 to infinity means k equals to 0 means there is no control. K equals to infinity means a lot greater control effort is provided. So how those gain changes, okay? So for example, if suppose you have an open loop system like x double dot plus x dot, this is just stable system. And its open loop pole here is s equals to 0 and s equals to -1. So these 2 points are open loop poles. So this pole is okay, and then this one is oscillatory. So you want to make it sort of reduce its magnitude over time. So you should do the control. So if you apply simple P control, your closed loop pole it now changes to S plus 1 plus K equals to 0. And the root of that is formulated this way. As you can see here, if you plug in 0 here, it's going to be matching with the open loop pole. If you have a infinity for the K, where does value go? This one will have plus minus J, right? So it's a lot something near to this infinity axis for the top and the bottom. So by changing K from 0 to 0.1, 0.2, blah, 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 the trajectory for the closed loop pole looks like this. Okay, so if you increase K, your poles will moving this way. So suppose that you have a certain amount of damping, and with the response time, maybe you should pick this value K as your final control design. Okay, and definitely here, for example, the point there is out of the root locus is the point that you cannot achieve by just simple P control system. Okay. Yeah, this is a quick brief review about what you have learned in your undergrad for the automatic control or system dynamics courses. And next time, I'm going to talk about how we can understand the human sensory feedback control of motion.